everyone. Thank you so much for joining on this new format of Shark Hour this week. So there were a few guests and everything that weren't able to make the time. And so I decided to do this new format to hopefully be able to include as many people as we can. So today we're here with Dr. Alexandra McInturf. Is that how I pronounce it?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah, so we are going to be on YouTube today for this one, and hopefully you all saw the link over on Instagram, came over here, and you're ready to watch. So yeah, we will just go ahead and get started if that sounds good. So yeah, Alex, do you want to give a brief intro about yourself?
Yeah, so I am currently a postdoctoral fellow at Oregon State University in the Big Fish Lab here. I originally came from Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I grew up. I did my undergrad at Williams College in Massachusetts. And then I came to Bimini during my gap year before grad school. I was accepted into my grad school program while I was in Bimini, actually, which was really exciting. And then I've spent the last 5 or 6 years in Davis at UC Davis in the animal behavior program, got my PhD in December, and now I am here in Oregon.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. So did where you grow up like have any influence on you deciding to like pursue marine biology, or how did like where you grew up influence your love of the ocean? I know you were in Ohio, but
Yeah, I actually get that question a lot. People are like, how did you end up with sharks? Like that's not, we don't have those in Ohio except for in the aquariums, certainly not in the Ohio River as far as I'm aware, which is where I grew up there. But it's really funny because I'm not the first shark scientist I met from Ohio. So like my supervisor, Taylor Chappell, is also from Ohio. And there's a few other folks on the West Coast, and we've all been like, huh, interesting that we all left to go study shark science. But I don't know. I think I was very fortunate to grow up and be able to go to the beach every year for, annual vacation just down to Florida. But I wasn't raised on the water. So I think that the ocean for me presented an extra level of like mystery and almost like there's a lot going on under there that I'm not familiar with when I was in Florida. And I think that in reflecting on this question over many, many years, I think that it's actually a fear-driven response. Like I was a little bit not sure about what was in the ocean. It was kind of exciting, but also really scary. So to combat that fear, I think I just tried to learn more about it. And then as you and many other folks know, the more you learn about sharks, the more you want to keep learning. And so I decided I was going to be a shark scientist like very young, like when I was 12. Okay. So a lot of people from my high school are like, I can't believe you're still doing this thing. Like I can't believe that actually happened. So yeah, I think that's kind of where it comes from.
Awesome. No, I can definitely understand that too, because I grew up in Tennessee and went to school for my undergrad in Nebraska. So I didn't have much opportunities to like go to the ocean or anything like that. So I can definitely relate to like being just like interested in what was going on under there, because I wasn't always out on the water, and I wanted to know. I wanted to know what was going on, just so fascinated with it. So I can definitely understand that. Yeah. So how kind of did you decide that marine biology was something you were interested in? Like when you said you turned 12 and everything, was there like a specific moment that you can remember that where you were like, yes, like this is something that changed everything maybe?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. So I wanted to be a vet for a really long time. I was always like animals. I don't care about people. Like I just want to do stuff with animals. As a lot of kids are, I think. And I remember being in Florida one year where I was like, Dad, is there like a career where you can like study the ocean? And he was like, he's also from Ohio. He's an architect. He grew up in Ohio. He was like, I think they call it marine biology or something. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So like, actually that is a moment I distinctly remember being like, oh, it's a thing. You actually can do this as a career. And a lot of people since then, I've gone to a bunch of weddings and reconnected with people. And a lot of people are like, you're the only person I know who's actually a marine biologist. Like it seems like a fake career that they just feature in movies and stuff sometimes. And then they're like, no, that's actually like, you are that.
It's a thing. Yeah. That's so funny because I've seen like memes on Twitter too. And it's like, why did we all want to be marine biologists when we were younger? And then none of us ended up doing it. And I was like, well, some of us never grew out of the so
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So did pursuing marine biology have an impact on where you decided to attend school for your undergrad?
Actually, yes and no. So like I knew I wanted to do marine biology. I was a student athlete, so I played soccer for like my whole life. And I wanted to play soccer in college. So actually that probably played a bigger role in where I decided to do my undergrad. but sharks were always kind of at the back of my mind. And I was like, I'm going to get through my college career for soccer and then really focus on the marine biology. That being said, like I knew I wanted to get my PhD pretty young. I mean, I like school, I like learning. I knew I might want to be a professor someday. So I decided though that given that it might not work out, right? Like you always have to kind of embrace that possibility. So I decided to go to a liberal arts school. Pretty small, pretty broad education. My degree is in biology and English. Actually, I double majored. So it wasn't like a research driven institution like I'm at now, where like I did my PhD. It was very much just like broad interdisciplinary education. And I figured I could always specialize later on, which is exactly what I did. So yeah, I would say actually sharks did not drive me to Western Massachusetts, but I was really happy to be there when I was there.
Cool. So while you were there then, what opportunities like such as internships, research, volunteerships, like study abroad did you participate in during your undergrad, if any? And have like any of these helped shape your career today if you participated in any?
Yeah, totally. So I did this really unique program that Williams College has with like a bunch of liberal arts schools in New England, and it's called the Williams Mystic Program. So it takes place in Mystic, Connecticut, and basically you're living in Mystic for like a whole semester. And the whole purpose of the program is to give you an interdisciplinary approach to studying the ocean. Awesome. So I was taking maritime history courses, a literature of the sea, marine policy, in addition to oceanography. And you were doing your own research project the whole semester, and we were traveling. So actually the only time I've been to Oregon before I moved out here was through this program, because we did a road trip from Seattle down to Coos Bay. So we got to see a lot of different coastlines as well. We would do these field expeditions. I went sailing off the coast of Puerto Rico, and we did the whole, Pacific Northwest trip. And of course, I spent a lot of time in the Northeast as well. So it was very unique, very small program, but it actually laid the foundation for kind of my approach, I think, to studying sharks generally, and which I think we'll talk about in a little bit, also my passion for science communication as well.
Really, really cool. What research project or opportunity did you do during then?
So there weren't any shark projects because there was a megafauna person at this place I was studying. So I studied plankton. I was studying the impact of like the Mystic Bridge. There's like this massive bridge, on how it affected like plankton numbers and composition around the bridge. So basically what we found is that like the bridge creates a lot of mixing of water. So that just creates a lot of mixing in the plankton community there. It was just like a very simple, take an idea and run with it through the entire scientific process type of project. But it's a little bit funny now because I study basking sharks or G plankton. So
cool. Full circle for sure. And that's just another example too, like for people that can't find something maybe specifically in sharks right away too, if you can find anything like marine related, aquatic related, or anything even besides that, if you're in Ohio and there's something with like maybe studying some plant as well, like that's amazing too, because you're getting that experience of being a good scientist, doing a literature review, doing like gathering a lot of data, finding out how to analyze it. That all makes you a good scientist. So totally. Amazing. So if I'm not mistaken too, it seems like the time in between your undergrad and your PhD is when you were able to do a lot of internships, one which was here. So your first opportunity that I saw, I think, was with Oceans Research in South Africa. Could you explain a bit more about this program and what this opportunity provided for you?
Yeah, totally. So like I said, I knew I wanted the broad educational background, and I wasn't planning on taking a gap year originally. But actually my soccer team did really well that year. And so we ended up playing in NCAAs through when I was supposed to be applying to grad school. So of course I'm a very type A person. And then this idea that I couldn't take my next step immediately really freaked me out. But I decided to try to make the most of it. And I said, okay, well, I haven't gotten hands-on shark experience basically ever. I volunteered at the aquarium in Ohio, and I got to do some shark stuff and just kind of, helping out the shark scientists there, but not really leading my own project. And so I was like, I need time to really learn the methods that people use to study sharks, because I want to be able to speak about it intelligently when I try to apply to grad school. And also a gap year would really help me take time to actually write those applications because they are a job in themselves. So I just honestly, people ask me how I found those programs. I just Googled, like, I was like, okay, I went to my parents and I said, here's my plan for the year. I need you to front the money for oceans. And then I'm going to apply to Bimini as well. And I will work in between. So I was actually an assistant soccer coach at my university. I worked in a cafe. I was a nanny. I was a science writer at Mystic again. I moved back there for a while. And in between, that was all happening as I was going to these other expeditions, like Oceans, for example, this internship. So I Googled it and I said shark science internships, and Oceans popped up. And so basically I went to Mossel Bay in South Africa to study white sharks a few months after I graduated from college. And I had an awesome experience. Like, I was surrounded by really good people. It was the kind of my first time doing a big international trip on my own. Like, you're just kind of getting on a plane and going somewhere. You don't know what to expect. My family didn't know what to expect. Are we going to hear from you? Are we not? I mean, in retrospect, it was a huge leap of faith for them to just send me off. But it was really amazing. And like being on the water, learning to be on boats, getting to know a lot of other people internationally. It's a big international community there as well. Consider how different cultures interact with the ocean in different ways. I think that's also very important. So yeah, I was able to do a lot of stuff that I now kind of occasionally do sometimes because my supervisor also does white shark work. So things like photo ID, monitoring prey movements to and from islands, like seals, for example. We were looking at whales too. We were doing a whale monitoring survey. And I just had a really good time. And that was a moment for me where I actually remember writing in my journal, going down there. I was like, this is where I find out if this is really what I want to do. Because, you can say you want to do shark science all you want. You don't always know what it's going to be like. And actually, I think a part of me was terrified that it wasn't going to be what I wanted to do. And I did not have a backup plan. Yeah. So it was really gratifying to me that it was like exactly, I found myself amongst people that I've never been around before who shared a common knowledge and passion. And that was really exciting. So Oceans was a really good kind of stepping stone. And I'm also happy I did it before Bimini. It was only a month long. And then when I got to Bimini, it was almost like I continued to evolve as a shark researcher after that.
For sure. And I love the aspect you say too, where you were just like being sent off. You didn't know what to expect. Cause I definitely felt that coming here. Cause this has been like my first experience in like shark research, science, and all of that too. And I was just like, what am I getting myself into? Like, you don't know because you're going to a different country. You're just not sure. This is my first time out of the country. Like, I had no idea. I was just like, but then it ends up being amazing. And thankfully, yeah, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And like you said too, that fear, like, am I going to like it or not? But once you're immersed in it, it's pretty hard. It was pretty hard for me not to like it. So
yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. But I think especially with these field programs and Bimini the same way, like you have to get used to some degree of discomfort, right? Like you're getting out of your comfort zone in so many ways. It's not luxurious at all. So it really, I think, and I found this to be true in Oceans, and I think it was true in Bimini as well. It really weeds out people who probably do not and like actually want to be in this realm.
Yeah, no, and it's okay if you decide that it's not for you too, because like it's very specialized, I guess I would say, because it is interesting. You come and you deal with a lot of the bugs, a lot of the gross bait on top of that you just like don't think about on top of that. So yeah. And yeah, field remote research station life is definitely a different world for sure. Yes, so your next opportunity, as you mentioned a little bit, was with the Bimini Shark Lab as an intern. So how did you find out about this opportunity? Well, I guess searching a little bit. So I guess why did you decide to come here specifically out of all the opportunities you looked at?
Yeah, so Oceans. So I did Oceans, and then I was between Bimini and a few other internships kind of in that same part of the world. The manager at the time, I had a really awesome interview with her, and she had also done Oceans, I believe.
Oh, cool.
So kind of this funny thing where we had a really good rapport. Rachel Cashman, we had an awesome rapport, and I really liked her, and she was asking me really good questions. I will say, like, Bimini Shark Lab is obviously a big name. And another way that I found out about these organizations is I was a huge nerd and would read scientific papers like in my off time about sharks, because that was the only way I could learn about them.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for the affiliations of some of the authors on the papers. And so Bimini came up in some of those papers as well. So I was psyched to get into Bimini. And yeah, so I was there in 2016 during January and February.
Okay.
Which also corresponded, as I said, to the times that we were being recruited or applying and getting interviews for grad school.
Right.
And I loved my experience in Bimini. Like I showed up. It was another thing where I was like, okay, I've done this once before. I can go into situations not totally knowing what to expect. Just kind of have to go in and be flexible. Like that's right. And that's a lesson I have taken even through my postdoc, is like, when I go do field work now, I don't need to know every detail. I need to know how to take care of myself and what I need to be comfortable. And, you know, from there, you just have to be flexible.
That's very true too, because like usually you can go in with a plan, but usually sometimes field work has another plan. So
Oh yeah. Like most recently I was on a trip to Alaska looking for salmon sharks, and I was tagging, no pun intended, I was jumping onto a salmon tagging expedition. And I had met like a few of the folks who might be up there via Zoom during the pandemic, but I didn't know who all was going to be there. Didn't know how many of us there were, didn't know where we were staying. All I knew is I had a plane ticket. And it was one of those things where I was like, I've done this enough at this point that doesn't scare me, and that's okay. But yeah, Bimini was instrumental also for networking for me. Not only was I able to get super hands-on experience with some of the methods I ended up wanting to use for my PhD, like the tagging and the tracking, but I was able to talk to people, like Matt Smuckle was doing his PhD while I was there.
Okay.
And I think it was his PhD. And so I was able to kind of talk to PhD students and the PIs and like people who were kind of organizing projects, and I was talking to the managers and learning about people's paths and where they wanted to go after that. And a lot of those connections I have actually been able to maintain. And there's still like a level of, when I meet people in the shark world now, it's like, oh, did you do Bimini? I did Bimini too. You know, like that. It's just a level of common knowledge, I guess, that you have a commonality that can be used to kind of jumpstart and form new connections, which I really like. So yeah, I had so much fun in Bimini. And actually a funny story is that I got my UC Davis interview while I was there.
Okay.
They flew me out to California, Davis did, for the interview, but I didn't have any interview clothes because I was doing field work.
Right.
The weekend before I went, the whole lab just dressed me. Like I took none of my own clothes to this interview because I didn't have any, but people who were there for several months longer than I had brought a few nicer clothes. So I was like hodgepodge dressing myself with other people's clothes. And then I show up at my interview and I'm super tan and I'm wearing flip-flops because I don't have any other clothes. And I'm wearing like this like kind of island loungewear.
Yeah.
And like people loved it because I was able to be like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm coming directly from this field station. Here are some of the projects I've been helping out with. Right. And it was such a good way to interview, I think. And then I found out that I had gotten the position like the next week, and I was able to celebrate with people who really understood what that meant. So that was a really special moment for me there.
Definitely. Did the charity bin exist then for clothes?
No, I don't think so.
We have like a big tote we use now, and it's called the charity bin. And whenever like anyone leaves or they don't want a piece of clothing anymore, they just throw it in there. So whenever we need like an extra item, we'll just go in there.
Oh, that's so smart. I wish I'd had that. I do remember bringing back tons of chocolate from Trader Joe's.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. I was taking requests. I was like, if you're going to dress me, I'll bring back some stuff for you all.
There we go. Yeah, you know, you have to stock up on your favorite snacks because there is not much options here. So
nope. Yeah.
That is so funny. So you mentioned some of the projects you got to help with during the time too. So what research did you have the opportunity to work with while you were here during this time? And what skills did you develop that have helped you today?
Yeah, so I jumped onto a bunch of different projects, and that's actually probably where I was able to get the most animal handling experience directly. In oceans, we were primarily doing more photography or observations rather than actually working up the sharks. Obviously, you can't do the same thing with white sharks that you could do with lemon sharks or tiger sharks in Bimini. So I was doing a few things. The hammerheads were around when I was there. So it was great hammerhead season, and that was really fun.
Awesome.
I got to help out with some of the laser photogrammetry, using those lasers to like look at the size of individuals, using specific identification and markings along the stomach and the fins and stuff to identify who was around. So hammerhead dives were my favorite thing to do. I was also helping out with some of the personality experiments that were going on, looking at juvenile lemon sharks in pens and how they associate with certain other individuals or not. So I was doing a lot of the pen building and going out and trying to catch juvenile lemon sharks. That happened a lot. I think that we were also doing the long lining. So we were looking for tiger sharks, and I also really like doing the long lining. That was really fun. Just seeing what you can come up with. And we caught some pretty big tiger sharks as well during that time. Yeah. And then finally, what I ended up proposing for a huge chunk of my PhD, which I didn't end up doing, but was a good idea nonetheless, I think, was acoustic tracking. So we were going out and, you know, learning how to use certain devices to listen for the animals who were tagged underwater. And I still know how to use those types of devices, and we use them in our lab now. And so it's nice to be able to, it was the first time I'd ever been able to just interact with some of this technology. And so it was great to just get the hands-on experience for 2 months.
Right. And it's amazing that so many like different things are going on at once too, because then you can really figure out where like your skills fit best too, and what you're most interested in, which topics you're most interested in. So that's what's always like amazed me so much about here too. Yeah, cool. Besides getting dressed for your UC Davis interview, do you have a favorite memory or day like besides that from here?
From Bimini. I have so many. I feel like it's hard to pick one. The one where I got into grad school was like really awesome. Also because Moritz, who was another former Shark Lab alum, had also gotten into grad school that same week or something. So it was just a huge celebration, and like the amount of support we were feeling was incredible. So that I remember. The great hammerhead dives. I remember actually my funniest memory, the only time I've ever been afraid of a shark happened in Bimini.
Yeah.
But it was just, I had no experience. And it was my 3rd day on the water. I'd been sent out to do barracuda fishing for bait for the hammerheads. And I was like, oh, this is cool. It's fun. I was with 3 guys I never really met before, but they were all pretty experienced. And toward the end of the day, they were like, well, let's see if the hammerheads have shown up yet. And I was like, that sounds great, you know? But the sun is starting to kind of fade, and we get into the water. And so when you're getting into the water to bait for hammerheads, you're just scraping the fish, right? So you don't want to like give them full prey items to associate us with food. So I've never done this before. I'm just getting into the water and I'm just scraping the fish. And I'm like, well, they'll probably not show up. It's probably, you know, because I've never seen a hammerhead. I like don't believe it exists yet, really. And then just out of the blue, like in a movie, coming out of nowhere is this hammerhead, like at the surface kind of the water. And it's swimming right at me. And I have this bait in my hands, and I was like, what is the protocol here? Because this was kind of just a fun thing we were trying to do. Like no one thought to prep me for what happens if they actually show up. And luckily it was fine. Like it did swim straight for me, but I just put my hands out of the water and it just kind of swam below my fins. But it was a moment of like, oh, like, yeah, okay, here we are. Welcome to Bimini. Like this happens regularly.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And so you've mentioned that since you were young too, like sharks always kind of seemed like the goal and like what you wanted to work with. So what drew you particularly towards opportunities with sharks, I guess? What makes them such a good like model species for your research interests?
I don't think sharks are a good model species for any research question. I only say that. I don't actually mean that, but I think that they're really hard to study and they're very unique. So I think a lot of the questions we ask about sharks, sometimes those concepts are easily transferable to other organisms. But I think if you were to ask about a model system, you'd probably look at something that's a little bit easier to manhandle and also probably not so challenging to find in the ocean. I think I like sharks because they're the scariest from my perspective, to go back to that idea that they were the scariest thing I could think of in the ocean. So they were the thing I decided to focus on to kind of address the fear. And then they're just so cool. Like, I think the more I learned about them, the more I was like, it's wild to me that I go out now and I give talks and people only know about white sharks and tiger sharks, right? Like there's over 500 shark species or something, and many of them are less than a meter long. And this amount of diversity is tremendous. And so I like learning about sharks also because there's so much we don't know. Like, one of my study species is the basking shark. And so when I'm giving talks about basking sharks, I tell people my answer to you is probably going to be, I don't know. And that's okay. So
Yeah.
I think it's just very cool because a lot of the work that I feel like you can do with sharks is very conservation driven, right? Sharks play critical roles in ecosystems worldwide. So obviously anything you can learn about them is good in terms of thinking about how to conserve an ecosystem. And then there's just so much mystery to unveil that we still don't have a lot of the technology that we want to have to truly get at some of these questions, but it's fun to kind of chip away at them. So my degree is in animal behavior. I'm really interested in shark behavior, how they move, where they go, and what that can tell us about how we can better protect them or their habitats.
Awesome. Yeah. So starting to mention like that there's over 500 species of sharks too. You've worked with some unique ones for sure, which has been really cool. So for your PhD, you mentioned that you went to UC Davis. So one aspect of your research was studying salmon and seven-gill sharks in California. So what exactly did this research investigate and entail, and why both of these fish? What's the relationship?
Yeah, so that was not salmon sharks. That was like salmon.
Salmon, right?
It's salmon, which is relevant now because I'm studying salmon sharks now. So when I tell people kind of about my PhD journey, it was fraught with difficulty in many ways. I loved grad school. That's not to say that I didn't love every part of my experience. It is very hard. But my advisor retired after my first year. COVID happened. I went to Ireland 3 times to study basking sharks, and they didn't show up once during that time, which is very common behavior for basking sharks. It was just bad timing for my PhD. So what I took away from that and what I tell people now is when you go into your PhD, you can have the best laid plans. If you're doing shark research, those are likely going to be almost completely foiled depending on what species you're studying, and that's okay. So for the 7 gills, that was actually a data set I inherited when I first got there. It was something that my first supervisor, Pete Klimley, had been trying to publish, and he thought, this would be good for you to learn a little bit more about the local ecosystem, the 7 gills in the San Francisco Bay, get some analytical skills under your belt, and hopefully get a publication. So, the San Francisco Bay is a super unique environment for 7 gills. It's, I think, the only known pupping ground for that species, which is really cool. Pupping grounds for sharks are really hard to find. So learning about 7 gills was very cool, and it's something that my lab here is also doing. So I've been able to kind of think about, the 7 gills we're seeing here in the Pacific Northwest and how they connect to the population down in the San Francisco Bay. So that was kind of more of an analytical task. The salmon is interesting because I was having a really hard time getting funded for shark projects. And that's, I think, also a very common phenomenon if you're in this world. And so I actually applied for a fellowship to do some salmon physiology work, looking at how temperature affects predation of salmon in the local system that I was working in, so the Sacramento River. And that was very cool because it still addressed some of the questions I do hope to continue to ask with sharks, which is, does temperature affect how hungry you are or how active you are as a predator? What does that mean for climate change, right? So that was a really interesting, it's the first time I've deviated from sharks in my career, since undergrad, and I didn't know how I would feel about it. But it was really eye-opening and enlightening. And I think that, a lot of the questions we're asking about sharks, you can ask in other systems first if it's easier, and maybe apply some of those same concepts then to other shark species. So I would say just being flexible as part of your PhD is really important, especially when there's a global pandemic, right? You have to work with what you've got at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And just a curious question too, since some people don't all know that most sharks have 5 gills. Why do 7 gills have 7 gills?
I get that question a lot. I actually don't know the answer to that. I know 7 gills and 6 gills are they're in the most primitive order of sharks. So that just they've been around since the Jurassic, I believe. They've been around for a really long time. So I personally don't know why they have the extra gills. That might be a question for a physiologist, but we do know that it indicates that they've been around for a while, or at least the oldest species tend to have these extra gills. So they are really unique in that way. They're very cool species. I was actually doing field work with them up here in Washington like 2 weeks ago. So that was very, very fun. They're very fun. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, going along with all of that now, you have also mentioned a little bit that you coordinated with the Irish basking shark group in your PhD, and you continue to work with them. So can you explain a bit more about this group and how you got involved with this project? And what have been like your biggest results so far working with these sharks?
Yeah, so when I was actually recruited to Davis to work on basking sharks. So Pete Climley, again, my first supervisor, had given a lecture tour in Ireland. He was invited over there by the Irish basking shark group to give a talk on sharks generally and learn more about basking sharks there. When he got back, he knew that I wanted to work in it. He said, would you be the liaison between us and Ireland? And I was like, duh, of course I will. And so that's how that whole kind of project started. Now, as I mentioned, I went there a few times during my PhD, saw no sharks, and that's very common for the species worldwide. Some years they show up and some years they don't. But I put in my time over there. And as I was over there, I started working more directly with the Irish basking shark group, which I'm now the co-coordinator of. So, the group is essentially a network of volunteers. We are researchers, education specialists. We have filmmakers, science communicators, and our job is really just to raise awareness, do outreach, and educate folks about basking sharks in Ireland and elsewhere. With a conservation-driven kind of goal in mind. So, for example, we most recently developed a petition to protect basking sharks in Irish waters. They're endangered, but not protected there, even though it's a huge part of their range. And that was successful, actually, as of this year. So that's kind of been a very cool part of my work, because it's really allowed me to explore the intersection of research and policy and education in ways that I never would have been able to just working for a university. So I've really enjoyed that. They also, the folks in this group are well connected with folks in Ireland. So, as a researcher working internationally, I always try to avoid parachute science, right? You don't want to go to a place and not involve folks who live there in your research, right? A lot of what you're doing, they are going to want to know about. And it's also very helpful to rely on local resources and knowledge, right? They're going to know a lot more than you coming in.
Yes.
So the group has been instrumental in facilitating my fieldwork since then. They know all the local fishers. They know who's been seeing the sharks and when they're being sighted and where to go. So my PhD work for the basking sharks actually didn't happen in the way that I wanted it to. I was still able to work on a data set from NOAA, looking at basking shark trends in the Pacific, which I got because of my work with basking sharks in Ireland. I got a hold of that data set because of those credentials. But actually, this past April, I went back to Ireland to do what I had proposed during my PhD, now as postdoc, and saw basking sharks for the first time. And collected a ton of data. So this, again, you just have to kind of trust the process. And, when you're working with an endangered species, it's really hard. Like, you have to just have the patience. And in the meantime, for me, it was enough to be able to interact about the species with other folks who also really care about them. So it's kind of been this very cool experience.
Cool. Yeah. So you've continued to work with them as well. So your current position is as a CICOES. I don't know if you pronounce that anyway. The acronym.
We say CICOES, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah. A postdoctoral fellow at Oregon State University's Big Fish Lab. So can you explain a bit more about this lab and fellowship, and what research are you currently conducting with them?
Yeah. So I got this fellowship last year. It's a NOAA funded program.
Oh, cool.
That's really supporting, I think it's climate and oceanography and ecosystem sciences. So I got funded through this program and then chose to come here and work with Dr. Taylor Chappell, who had just started this big fish lab during the pandemic, actually, at Oregon State. So his lab hadn't really even grown yet beyond a few like volunteers. And we now have, I think, 7 or 8 people involved. We have about 2 postdocs. We have a PhD student, master's student, and a bunch of RAUs and interns who work with us kind of year round. And it's been an amazing experience. This is a wonderful place to work. Taylor he just came from Stanford, where he'd been working for many years on white sharks. And he actually also went to UC Davis. So our world is very small. And we'd known about each other for a while, so it was very cool to come work here and learn from him. He's very good at field work, which is something that I didn't get as much of during my PhD because of the pandemic. So it's been super fun to be up here and be able to go out in the field and go to Ireland and work with someone who's very knowledgeable about everything I learned in Bimini and more. So my project currently is twofold, I guess. We have the basking shark project, which is really just an extension of what I was working on during my PhD. We got some other folks involved, including the Big Fish Lab and Stanford University and a few universities in Ireland as well. So it's actually grown. So that's something we're working on here. And in addition to that, my main project that I'm funded for CICOES for is the salmon shark project. So now I'm finally transitioning to salmon sharks. So I did study salmon during my PhD. And so this was actually kind of a perfect merging of worlds where I get to study the predators that might be eating the salmon based on the knowledge I had about salmon from my PhD. So I'm basically studying what salmon sharks eat, how much of it is salmon, where are they going, and how often do their movement patterns overlap with salmon presence. So that's kind of what I've been working on this year and will next year as well.
Okay, does that include like passive or active tracking?
So for that, we'll be using satellite tag data.
Cool.
So that was actually something I didn't get to learn as much in Bimini, but I was around people who were talking about this sort of thing. So I didn't feel totally ignorant of the whole process of using satellite tags and tagging generally. But I have been able to kind of hop onto the 7GO project that our PhD student Jess Schulte is working on. She's doing acoustic tagging. A lot of that is very similar to what we did in Bimini as well. So we have a lot of different tagging projects going on here in the Big Fish Lab.
Cool. Yeah. And I've actually noticed for the Big Fish Lab, y'all have been doing like a lot of really cool things on like Twitter and like stuff for social media, which is really cool. Is that you?
It's not me. I did introduce the concept that I think social media is a very powerful tool.
Yes.
And it's a group effort. We all have developed our own standard protocol for how to use social media. Shark researchers, it's very, I mean, as you know, you have to be careful with what you put online, and you don't want to set bad examples for other people to mistakenly follow. You don't want people to think that the sharks are scarier than they might already think they are. So we've had several science communication meetings about how we want to build our online presence.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Social media is such an important tool, even if you love to hate it or hate to love it or something. It is so important, especially as shark scientists, because like the media, I feel like, is mostly paints sharks in a bad light, and it has for years. And so being able to present what we're doing in different ways, show them in a good light, is so important, because that's some people's only introduction or only way to see sharks. And so yeah, so it's so important.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. So from research, like any research can be during your entire career, do you have a favorite memory at all from any day out in the field, any day analyzing data, or anything?
It's really hard to say. I think it depends on the day you ask me.
Okay.
Most recently, my favorite memory was seeing basking sharks for the first time.
Sure.
You know, you've studied this animal hypothetically, and this happens with a lot of shark scientists, right? You're not always the person on the water. Sometimes you're just dealing with the data, and that's still very important. As someone who had been trying to see basking sharks for like 7 years, seeing them for the first time was like a very emotional moment. Like I wasn't crying, but I definitely had tears in my eyes.
It's okay if you were. I've cried at so many things. So
No, but I was like sitting there and I was like, okay, gotta be professional. But at the same time, the cool part too is that everybody who was on the boat with me was either Basking Shark Group affiliated or collaborators of mine who I had known for a long time, who knew how important this was to me.
Right.
So even though we were trying to get the tags ready and get out on the water, everybody kind of let me have that moment of like, this is really, really amazing.
Yeah, let it sink in.
Yeah, they were like, okay, we're gonna give you this moment. And honestly, like basking sharks are the coolest animal to see in the wild. Like you see those pictures of them online, they're so big in person and they just swim with they look like underwater Cessnas. Like they just swim with their mouths open under the boat. They have no fear of you. And it's just amazing to just look in the water and see this massive animal just casually filter feeding. Like it's one of the most amazing things that I've ever witnessed. So I like to say basking sharks are cooler in person than imagined, which is a big deal. And so seeing them for the first time was pretty amazing.
Awesome. Oh, that's so cool. Were you actually in the water with them or did you see them from the surface?
So the first time I saw them was on the surface. Yeah, I have had the opportunity to get in the water with them, which we are not advocating for necessarily. But we do have to take pictures of the tag. Some of the tags that we're putting on them are like those accelerometers, those like animal Fitbits and cameras. So we want to know the orientation of those tags on the animal to say like, okay, what angle is this capturing? Is there something that we need to correct for in our tagging data to account for the animal's, you know, the offset of the tag on the animal? So we do get in the water to take pictures of those. The cool part of being in the water with basking sharks is that they will just approach you. So we don't advocate, as the basking shark group, we don't advocate for anybody swimming up to the sharks when they're in these areas, but they will just come up to you.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a little bit daunting when they're like, they could actively swallow you and you're like, well, that mouth is like as big as me. But they really have no fear, right? They are apex predators at the top of a very small food chain, right? So phytoplankton, zooplankton, shark. And they just, they really have no fear. So being in the water with them is really a unique experience for sure. Very similar to that hammerhead that just swam right up to me. And I was like, oh, you are a predator. Like you do not have fear of me right now.
Right. So. Those are moments that remind you like that these are wild animals and they'll do what they want to do. So yeah, cool. So kind of a fun question. When you are not in the field doing research or analyzing data, what can you be found doing for fun?
Oh, so I'm a big proponent of work-life balance, right? Like as much as I love my job, I also find that I'm most enthusiastic about it when I can be rested.
Absolutely.
I end up thinking about sharks probably most of my day, but I don't like to force it. So I try to be really active, like as a former athlete, I'm now washed up athlete. I still find that activity is really important for like making me feel better just generally. Like if I go for a run in the morning, I'm much better at being at my desk the rest of the day. So I run, I do CrossFit, I hike, I like to dive, I cycle. I picked up a lot of this stuff during the pandemic as well. I procrastinate is what I call it. So I like to bake when I do and don't have time.
There we go.
And yeah, I love to read. So like I said, I was an English major in college, and actually that was really just because I like to read books and ended up taking the classes anyway. So I'm a big like fiction reader. That's something I like to do every day.
Cool. Yeah. So science communication is something that is super important to you. So why is this such an important tool for you as a scientist?
Yes. Well, we've talked about a lot of these concepts kind of throughout this discussion already.
Yes.
Coming from Ohio, the only source of information I had was essentially other science communicators, right? Like I, especially as a young person, was not reading papers. I didn't really know to go do that. I was going to aquariums. I was like watching Shark Week. I was trying to learn stuff that was accessible and easy for me to understand. And then as I was working in the aquarium growing up in Ohio, the Newport Aquarium, which is actually in Northern Kentucky, I learned that a lot of people know very little about the ocean. A lot of people that were coming through our aquarium were saying things that I was just like, what? Like, oh, you don't know this? Oh, and that's not anybody's fault. It was just, I realized that like, if you don't have accessible information that is widespread, even or especially beyond coastlines, like it's really hard for people to support informed conservation efforts or change their actions to be a little bit more sustainable.
Mhm.
So science communication became something that I just love talking about sharks. And I learned that not everybody loved me talking about sharks if I was speaking in a really jargony way. So I learned to kind of break it down. And now outreach and science communication that's perhaps the favorite part of my job sometimes.
Yeah, and you've also created like graduate level classes for these as well. Can you explain a bit more about this?
Yeah, I was in grad school and I was hoping to kind of supplement my training with some communication training because I thought that'd be very valuable.
Yeah.
We took a communication course. It was UC Davis is an agricultural school, so it was primarily targeted toward folks going out to visit farmers.
Mm.
Um, and I was in that course with like a few other marine folks, and we were like, a lot of these tools are not stuff we would use, right? And
Yeah.
in particular, a lot of those tools were not up to date with where a lot of people are currently getting their information, which is online.
Mhm.
So we were like, me and my colleagues thought, we can maybe do this in a way that's more targeted towards folks we want to reach.
Mhm.
And so our class we ran it for 2 years. We've done it in a series of workshop forums. I'm hoping to do something similar here at Oregon State. It's just having folks who are very good at stuff like social media, making engaging public presentations, working with kids. It's having folks who are very good at those things come in and tell us what their secrets are, essentially.
Mhm.
Um, and it's grounded in a lot of the theory as well. So we're reading papers about science communication. It's a very up and coming field. You can now get
Mhm.
degrees in it. So it's less kind of folks kind of trying to figure it out on themselves and more structured now.
Yeah.
In particular, you mentioned the social media, like that's something at the Big Fish Lab we have really focused on, especially during the pandemic. We noticed that that's where a lot of people were spending their time, and to reach a lot of people, it's free, it's accessible, it's available pretty much around the world. So if you want to reach a broad audience, you really have to know how to target them appropriately on social media, where you are also vying for attention among millions of other people.
Right.
So doing that is really actually scary sometimes. And I think scary to a lot of people who are not used to being online. But it's also really critical because that's where you're going to be reaching a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and kind of my last question for you then is what advice would you have for someone considering a career in marine biology but may have not had many opportunities to get experience or not sure if the field is for them?
Yeah, I think the thing I wish I could change about shark science right now is its accessibility.
Yeah.
Um, even internships like Bimini and Oceans, like I was very lucky because I was in a position where I had parents who could front the money for that, and I had jobs lined up to support that otherwise.
Hmm.
That's not the case for a lot of people. And to get this hands-on experience, it's really about who you know right now,
Yeah.
or what you can pay or afford to do. And I think that that's something I hope will continue to change. Like organizations like the Minorities in Shark Science Organization, Miss, I know works with Bimini, I think now.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so those are organizations that are really trying to make a big change there that I completely support. But I would say if you haven't had the opportunity to get that hands-on experience, what I tell students is to just try to get research experience generally.
Yes.
Um, don't be afraid. My undergrad thesis was on insects in addition to the plankton project I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
No, you just have to get your foot in the door and say, I have these skills, I can do the analysis. You don't need to be able to like go diving with sharks every day to be a shark scientist. And in fact, a lot of what people are looking for now in terms of grad students or even beyond is this ability to do something like coding, using statistical softwares or write. And all of those skills you can then apply to the shark world. But imposter syndrome is very real. So just because you feel like, oh, I'm not good enough, I haven't done the shark work yet, that doesn't mean anything. Everybody feels imposter syndrome all the time. So I would say like try to push that to the side as much as you can, reach out to people, take opportunities as they arise, and don't be afraid to network a lot as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was all great, and I definitely second all of that. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on today, and thank you for speaking to everyone about all of your experience. It's amazing, and I enjoyed hearing about it so much. So if anyone has questions, because usually with like our Shark Hours on Instagram Live, we have like a question and answer section at the end.
Yeah.
How can people reach out to you if they would like to ask any questions after this?
Yeah, totally. So there's a few ways. You can Google me, my website comes up. You can contact me through my website. You can contact me through social media. I'm on Instagram and Twitter. It's Dr. Surf and Turf for both of them. And also you can email me. So my email is my last name and then at Oregon State. But you should be able to just Google Big Fish Lab as well to find me.
Awesome. Yeah, well, again, thank you so much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you so much for coming on and speaking with me.
Awesome. Thanks, Bailey.